June 6, 2025. Inside cell 401 at Arkansas's Varner Supermax, a correctional sergeant approaches the cell of one of the state's death row inmates. 43-year-old Latavius Johnson is lying on the floor. There's vomit on his shirt. He isn't responding. Staff rush inside. Narcan is administered. CPR begins. 27 minutes later, Johnson is dead. Department of Corrections initially announces the death without explaining why he died. But state police searching cell 401 find something. 2 pieces of paper, including a white strip they believe is K2. And when you start digging into who Latavius Johnson actually was, this story goes back more than 2 decades. Before death row, he was serving life for shooting his own father twice in the head and robbing him for $45 in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. While serving that life sentence, he killed a correctional officer over what court records say started with a dispute over a pair of unauthorized contraband shoes. So tonight on Arkansas Dark Side True Crime TV, we're going from the first murder that sent Latavius Johnson to prison all the way to cell 401, where the man Arkansas planned to execute would ultimately die before the state ever got the chance to carry out his death sentence. To understand how Latavius Johnson eventually ended up on Arkansas's death row, we have to go back more than 2 decades before his death inside cell 401, before the K2, before the death sentence, and before the murder of Correctional Officer Barbara Esther, because Barbara Esther wasn't the first person Latavius Johnson killed. Latavius Johnson was born in Pine Bluff, Arkansas on October 31, 1981. According to court records, when Latavius was around 12 years old, his mother became seriously ill with AIDS. That was in 1994. 2 years later, in 1996, she died. After losing his mother, Latavius went to live with his father, Johnny Johnson. And according to information that would later come out during court proceedings, that wasn't exactly a stable home environment. The court record describes Johnny as drinking heavily and using drugs. There were allegations that he brought prostitutes into the home and that he was physically abusive toward Latavius. Eventually, Latavius was placed outside of the home. Around 1997, he was sent to the Vera Lloyd Presbyterian Home, a residential facility for troubled youth. And while he was there, something significant happened. Latavius was diagnosed with chronic depression. He received counseling and was prescribed Tegretol. For roughly 2 years, he remained at Vera Lloyd. But in May of 1999, that placement ended. And according to the Arkansas Supreme Court's later description of his history, it wasn't because Latavius had suddenly completed all of his treatment. There were funding problems. Once that placement ended, so did the counseling and treatment he had been receiving. And Latavius went back to his father, back into the same relationship the court would later describe as unstable and abusive. Now, none of that excuses what happened next. And I want to make that clear. Understanding someone's background is not the same thing as excusing murder. But this history becomes extremely important later, because when Johnson is eventually facing the death penalty for killing Barbara Esther, his childhood, depression, and discontinued mental health treatment become part of the argument over whether his attorneys adequately presented evidence that might have convinced a jury to spare his life. But we're still years away from Barbara Esther. Right now it's 2000. Latavius Johnson is 18 years old, and less than a year after returning home, his father would be dead. The later court opinions give us the broader history, but Johnson's ADC pen pack is much more direct about what authorities said happened inside his father's home. According to ADC's account, Johnny Johnson was inside his home when he was shot, not once, twice in the head. And according to records, Latavius admitted that he shot him. But there was allegedly another person there that day, a man identified in the records as H.C. Pruitt. ADC's account says that after Johnny had been shot, approximately $45 was taken from his pants pocket. Pruitt reportedly admitted helping search the residence for money. He eventually entered a guilty plea. So when we're talking about the $45 and what Pruitt allegedly did inside that house, what isn't in dispute is that Johnny Johnson was killed. Latavius admitted shooting his father, and he would eventually plead guilty to his father's murder. Johnson stood before the court and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. On August 17, 2001, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was 19 years old. And think about where his life stood at that point. His mother had died when he was a teenager. He had spent part of his adolescence in a residential treatment facility. His mental health treatment had ended. He returned home. Then, at 18 years old, he killed his father. By 19, Latavius Johnson was entering the Arkansas prison system with a life sentence. There was no ordinary release date waiting for him, and at this point, nobody could have known that killing his father would eventually become only the first murder attached to his name, because Johnson would spend more than a decade incarcerated before Barbara Esther was killed. And when I started going through those years, one entry at a time, what stood out to me was just how quickly the problem started. You don't have to wait years into his sentence to see serious disciplinary allegations. You don't even have to wait until 2002. They start in 2001. And those records give us our first look at what Latavius Johnson was like inside prison. Before we go through Johnson's disciplinary history, there's something important that needs to be understood. What you're about to see comes from ADC's institutional records. A prison disciplinary is not the same thing as a criminal conviction. These are violations handled within the correctional system. And some of the descriptions on Johnson's status sheet are simply disciplinary codes without the complete underlying incident report. So I'm not going to take every code on this sheet and turn it into a separate criminal accusation. What we can do is look at the pattern, and that pattern begins almost immediately. December 26, 2001. Johnson had only been in ADC custody for a matter of months when the record shows a major disciplinary finalized on December 26th. Among the violations listed were battery, a verbal or written threat, and taking another person's property. Then look what happens. 2 days later, there's another one. December 28, 2001. This disciplinary includes another verbal or written threat. But this time, the record also contains categories involving sexual threats and provoking or agitating a fight. We're still in 2001. Johnson hasn't even been serving his life sentence for 6 months. And already his institutional record is beginning to grow. Then we get to an entry from February 14th, 2002. And this one deserves some explanation. The ADC record lists violations including failure to obey, insolence, conduct categorized as a felony or misdemeanor, and a verbal or written threat. But there's another category listed on this disciplinary, the forced black. Now stop right there, because this is exactly where reading these records responsibly matters. The status sheet gives us the disciplinary code. It does not give us enough information to independently establish what actually happened, who was involved, or the specific conduct ADC believed fit that category. So I'm not going to tell you Johnson committed another assault based solely on a disciplinary code. What I'm telling you is that this is how the Arkansas Department of Correction categorized part of that disciplinary in Johnson's own institutional history, and the disciplinary problems continued. As the years passed, Johnson's record repeatedly shows conflicts with staff and prison rules. But by 2010, another type of activity starts showing up in the records. January 20, 2012. Latavius Johnson had now been incarcerated for more than 10 years, serving life for killing his father. That afternoon, 46-year-old Corporal Barbara Esther confronted Johnson about a pair of tennis shoes prison officials considered contraband. Johnson disagreed. According to court records, Esther returned with Lieutenant Stephen Lane to confiscate the shoes. That's when everything escalated. Johnson was armed with a homemade metal shank approximately 6 inches long. When the officers attempted to take the shoes, Johnson attacked Esther, stabbing her 3 times. One of those wounds punctured her heart. Barbara Esther died from her injuries, and Johnson never denied stabbing her. He would later argue that he hadn't intended to kill Esther, and reportedly acknowledged that he should have simply surrendered the shoes and gotten another pair. But instead, a confrontation over contraband shoes had ended with a correctional officer dead. And remember, Johnson was already serving life. Now, he was facing the possibility of death. 10 days after Esther's killing, ADC finalized a major disciplinary against Johnson. The charges included aggravated battery, assault or threat against staff, possession of a weapon, felony or misdemeanor conduct, and failure to obey an order. Johnson received 30 days punitive isolation, 60-day restrictions on phone, visitation, and commissary privileges. Johnson was charged with capital murder, and prosecutors intended to seek the death penalty. Barbara Esther was killed in January 2012. Johnson's capital murder trial wouldn't conclude until November 2014. And while he waited, his disciplinary problems continued. Records from 2013 and 2014 show violations involving failure to obey staff, unauthorized property, and prohibited mail or telephone activity. But one entry stands out. Less than 2 months before his capital murder trial concluded, Johnson received another ADC disciplinary that included possession or introduction of a firearm or weapon. But the timing is hard to ignore. Johnson was awaiting trial for killing a correctional officer with a homemade weapon, and ADC records show him receiving another weapon-related disciplinary less than 2 months before that trial ended. Then, in November 2014, he admitted stabbing Barbara Esther. The jury would now decide whether that distinction mattered, and if it didn't, Latavius Johnson was about to go from serving life in prison to waiting for the state of Arkansas to execute him. Lee County jury found Latavius Johnson guilty of capital murder in the death of Corporal Barbara Esther. He was sentenced to death. ADC records show the death sentence entered into its system in January 2015, and Johnson was eventually housed as a death row safekeeper at Varner Supermax. At one point, his execution was scheduled for October 20th, 2015. But Johnson would be granted up by the Arkansas Supreme Court, and years of appeals followed. Johnson challenged his conviction and sentence, including arguments involving his mental health history and whether his attorneys had adequately presented evidence from his childhood. Ultimately, the death sentence remained, and Johnson stayed on death row. From his 2014 sentence until 2025, he spent more than 10 years under a death sentence. But even at Varner's Supermax, his disciplinary record shows something interesting. Contraband continued to appear. In 2017, Johnson was disciplined for possession or use of an unauthorized cell phone. In 2020, his record includes unauthorized mail or telephone activity and a separate disciplinary involving possession of a weapon. Then in 2023, he's disciplined for possession or movement of money and purchasing unauthorized items. Remember that. Cell phone, weapon, money. All while incarcerated. All while on death row. June 6, 2025, something else would allegedly be found inside Johnson's cell. This time, Johnson would be dead. On the afternoon of June 6, 2025, Sergeant Chinna Thomas was conducting diabetic call with a nurse in cell block 4. After diabetic call ended, staff began the dinner process. Thomas approached cell 401. Inside was Latavius Johnson. She noticed him lying on the floor. She knocked. Johnson didn't respond. Thomas called for assistance. ADC records placed the beginning of the emergency at approximately 2:52 p.m. Captain Laurinetta Smith arrived and described Johnson lying on his right side with vomit on his shirt. He was unresponsive. Staff entered the cell. Medical personnel administered 2 doses of Narcan and began CPR. At approximately 3:02 p.m., Johnson was removed from the cell and transported to the treatment room. A physician was contacted. According to the report, staff were instructed to administer 2 additional rounds of Narcan while continuing CPR. It didn't work. At 3:19 p.m., Latavius Johnson was pronounced dead. He was 43 years old. From the time the emergency was documented until Johnson was pronounced dead, approximately 27 minutes had passed. The state of Arkansas would never execute Latavius Johnson, but what investigators found afterward is where this story takes another turn. Johnson's death triggered an investigation. ADC Internal Affairs categorized the incident as death suspicious. Arkansas State Police investigators responded to Varner Supermax and began processing cell 401, and inside the cell, investigators documented something important. 2 pieces of paper. One was described as a white strip believed to be K2. State Police seized it. Their property report classified the evidence as property type, drug, narcotic, drug type, K2. Investigators photographed other things inside the cell as well. Cigarette paper was documented inside the toilet, and investigators photographed a burned battery they said had been used to create a lighter flame. Now, the circumstances surrounding Johnson's collapse begin looking very different. But when you compare the investigative records with ADC's own documentation, there are some things that don't line up. It can only make us wonder, is ADC hiding the fact that this could be another possible overdose? Recently, Department of Corrections all over the United States has received backlash for upticks in K2 deaths. Let's continue with Captain Smith's report. After Johnson was removed from cell 401, his property was searched, packed, and inventoried. And her statement specifically says, no contraband found. But according to Arkansas State Police records, their search of cell 401 recovered paper they believe to be K2. So which one is it? We plan on getting to the bottom of what's really going on in the Arkansas Department of Corrections with these suspicious deaths that they conveniently say during reporting. Now, let's give them the benefit of the doubt because there could be an explanation. ADC may have been referring specifically to Johnson's personal property that was packed and inventoried, while state police later found the suspected K2 somewhere else within the physical cell. Those aren't necessarily the same search. But if that's the explanation, the wording still matters. Because if you read ADC's report by itself, you could easily walk away believing nothing illegal was found. Then you read the state police investigation, and suspected K2 is being collected as evidence. And that's not the only discrepancy. ADC's Internal Affairs report classified Johnson's death as suspicious. But on that same report, look at the box asking whether the incident was drug-related. ADC marked no, and that's interesting, because Johnson had already been given multiple doses of Narcan. Now, Narcan doesn't prove somebody overdosed, but clearly, staff were treating the possibility that drugs could be involved. And then state police found suspected K2 inside the cell. So how does an incident involving multiple doses of Narcan and suspected K2 ultimately get entered into ADC's system as related? No. That's something in ADC's own paperwork that deserves to be pointed out. Initially, Johnson's death was treated as suspicious, and the cause wasn't publicly known. But the investigation continued. An autopsy was conducted. The medical examiner found no evidence Johnson intended to fatally harm himself with the substance. His manner of death was ultimately classified as accident. The case was eventually closed, so I'm not suggesting investigators ultimately ruled Latavius Johnson's death a homicide. They didn't. I'm not suggesting somebody intentionally gave him something to kill him. The records we have don't establish that either. But there is still one question these records don't answer. How did it get inside death row? Latavius Johnson wasn't housed in an ordinary environment. He was a death row inmate at Varner's Supermax. Yet his own ADC history shows that even under heavy security, prohibited items continued reaching him. A cell phone, money, a weapon, unauthorized communications. And finally, investigators say they found suspected K2 inside cell 401 after Johnson died. So the question isn't whether Latavius Johnson was innocent. He wasn't. He admitted killing his father. He admitted stabbing Barbara Esther. A jury convicted him of capital murder. This isn't about rewriting his history. It's about what happened inside the Arkansas prison system. Because if investigators are correct that suspected K2 was sitting inside the cell of a death row inmate, then somebody has to explain how it got there. When Johnson's death was initially reported publicly, the cause was unknown. The public didn't know about the vomit, They didn't know about the repeated doses of Narcan. They didn't know investigators would document cigarette paper in a burned battery. And they didn't know suspected K2 would be seized from cell 401. The records tell us those things now. What they don't tell us is how the K2 got through the walls of Varner's Supermax and into the cell of a man Arkansas had spent more than a decade waiting to execute. And maybe that's the biggest unanswered question in the entire Latavius Johnson story. Prison guards has allegedly been one of the ways things are smuggled into lockup. When you hear accusations that family and loved ones are doing the smuggling, we have to also take a look closely to the staff. In the end, the state of Arkansas never carried out Latavius Johnson's death sentence. Something inside cell 401 got there first. Thank you for watching Arkansas Dark Side True Crime TV. Oh, and we decided to try something new by using an AI voiceover instead of the traditional way. Because your opinion matters to us, please leave your comments below if you think we should keep using this method or switch back. Also, don't forget to let us know if you think ADC was trying to conceal K2 was allegedly involved. If you think guards are facilitating the smuggling of this dangerous drug. And what can we do to help prevent these occurrences?